In the quiet wooded hills of Tennessee, where neighbors know each other by name and church bells mark Sunday mornings, a darkness lurked behind the walls of an ordinary home. This is the story of Sylvia Vilches, a woman who left her native Costa Rica seeking the American dream, only to meet an unthinkable fate at the hands of those she loved most. This is a story about betrayal, violence, and a shocking discovery that would send shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Lewis Chapel. What started as a missing person report would unravel into one of the most disturbing murder cases Sequatchie County, Tennessee had ever seen. A case where a son would confess to beating his mother to death while his stepfather watched. A case where human remains would be found burned in a fire pit behind the family home. A case that proves the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers lurking in the shadows, but from the people sitting across the dinner table. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Sylvia Vilches was 55 years old when her life came to a violent end in October 2025. Known affectionately as Gabby to her friends and family, Sylvia had built a life thousands of miles from her birthplace in Costa Rica. She had made the journey that millions of immigrants make, seeking opportunity and a better future in the United States. Sylvia had settled in Lewis Chapel, a small rural community in Sequatchie County, Tennessee, on Lewis Chapel Mountain. This is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where people wave to each other on country roads and Sunday church services are a cornerstone of community life, where people don't lock their doors at night, and where violent crime is something that happens elsewhere. To her neighbors and fellow churchgoers, Sylvia was exactly the kind of person any community would be lucky to have. She was described by those who knew her as a kind, devoted, and selfless woman, someone who always put others before herself. Someone who showed up for church every Sunday, someone who seemed to embody the values that small-town America prides itself on: faith, family, and service. Sylvia lived in Graysville, Tennessee, with her husband David Gardner and her 18-year-old son, Gabriel Vilches. To the outside world, they appeared normal. Neighbors later told investigators that David and Gabriel seemed to have a loving relationship, that Gabriel was a regular kid, that nothing seemed amiss. But appearances, as this case would prove, can be devastatingly deceptive. On Tuesday, October 28, 2025, deputies from the Sequatchie County Sheriff's Office received a call that would set a horrifying chain of events into motion. Someone had reported concerns about Sylvia Vilches. She hadn't been seen, and people were worried. Deputies were dispatched to her residence to conduct what's called a welfare check, a routine procedure where officers knock on someone's door to make sure they're safe and well. When deputies arrived at the home that day, they were greeted by Sylvia's husband, 64-year-old David Gardner, and her son, 18-year-old Gabriel Vilches. The officers asked a simple question: "Where is Sylvia?" Both men had the same answer: she was traveling. She had gone on a trip to Costa Rica, they said. It made sense on the surface. After all, Sylvia was Costa Rican. It would be natural for her to visit her home country, to see family and friends she had left behind. The deputies took the information and left. But something didn't sit right with the investigators. As Detective Kaylee Smith of the Sequatchie County Sheriff's Office would later note in court documents, the stories from David Gardner and Gabriel Vilches weren't adding up. There were inconsistencies in their accounts. Details that didn't match the kind of red flags that experienced investigators are trained to spot. And then there was the phone. In this digital age, our cell phones leave digital breadcrumbs everywhere we go. They ping off cell towers, connect to Wi-Fi networks, and create a trail that can be traced. When investigators checked the location data for Sylvia's cell phone, they discovered something deeply troubling. Her phone wasn't pinging from Costa Rica or from any airport. It was pinging from right there at her residence. If Sylvia had traveled to Costa Rica, as her husband and son claimed, her phone would have gone with her, or at the very least, it would have shown activity at an airport or somewhere along a travel route, but it was at home. And Sylvia, according to her family, was not. This discrepancy was enough for investigators to take action. Detective Smith went to work obtaining a search warrant for the property. The initial welfare check had now escalated into a full missing person investigation with suspicious circumstances. By Thursday, October 30th, just 2 days after the initial report, investigators had their warrant in hand and were ready to search the Vilche Gardner home and the surrounding property. What they would find there would turn a missing person case into something far more sinister. When deputies entered the Vilches Gardner home on October 30th, they immediately knew they were looking at a crime scene. This wasn't a home where someone had simply packed their bags and left for a trip. This was a place where something terrible had happened. The evidence was overwhelming and impossible to ignore. According to the search warrant affidavit filed by Detective Kaylee Smith, investigators found multiple red stains on the carpet, stains they believed to be blood. But it wasn't just on the floor. There were red spatters on the walls, splattered across a desk, even splashed onto family photographs hanging on the walls, the kind of blood spatter that tells a story of violence, of impact, of a brutal assault. And then there was the vacuum. Sitting on the floor was a shop vac, the kind of heavy-duty vacuum people use in garages and workshops. Inside it was a red liquid that investigators believed to be blood. Someone had tried to clean up. Someone had attempted to erase the evidence of what had happened in that house. But blood is incredibly difficult to fully remove, especially when there's a lot of it. And there was a lot of it. The scene inside the house told investigators that Sylvia Vilches had not gone to Costa Rica. She had not left this property voluntarily. Something violent had occurred within those walls, and the likelihood that Sylvia had survived it was growing slimmer by the moment. But the horror didn't end inside the house. As investigators expanded their search to the property surrounding the home, they made a discovery that would confirm their worst fears and elevate this case to one of the most disturbing murders in Sequatchie County history. In the woods behind the house, investigators found a burn pit, and inside that burn pit, among the ashes and charred debris, were human remains bones, fragments of a body that had been deliberately set on fire. As investigators combed through the area, they found additional remains scattered further into the woods, pieces of a human being that had been destroyed and discarded like trash. The remains were immediately transported to the Tennessee Medical Examiner's Office in Nashville for further examination and identification, but investigators already knew in their hearts what the forensic evidence would eventually confirm. These were the remains of Sylvia Vilches. With this grim discovery, the case was no longer a missing person investigation. It was now a murder investigation. and David Gardner and Gabriel Vilches, who had told deputies just days earlier that Sylvia was traveling in Costa Rica, were taken into custody and transported to the Sequatchie County Justice Center. What happened next would shock even seasoned law enforcement officers who had seen their share of disturbing cases. During a recorded interview at the Sequatchie County Justice Center, 18-year-old Gabriel Vilches confessed to the murder of his mother, according to the arrest reports and affidavit filed by Detective Smith. Gabriel admitted that he had beaten his mother with a baseball bat. But the confession contained a detail that made this case even more horrifying. He said he beat his mother to death while his stepfather, 64-year-old David Gardner, stood by and watched to think about that for a moment. A son, beating his mother to death with a baseball bat, and a husband, the woman's partner, the man who had vowed to love and protect her, standing there watching it happen, not calling for help, not intervening, not trying to stop the violence, just watching. But the brutality didn't end with the murder itself. According to Gabriel's confession, after he had killed his mother, he and David Gardner dragged her body outside to a fire pit. And there, in the woods behind the home where Sylvia had lived, where she had made meals and celebrated holidays and tried to build a life, the two men burned her remains. They attempted to destroy the evidence of their crime by incinerating Sylvia's body, reducing her to bones and ash, scattering her remains in a burn pile and into the surrounding forest. It was an attempt to make her disappear, to erase her from existence, to avoid accountability for what they had done. Sheriff Bill Phillips of Sequatchie County spoke to local media about the case, and even he, a law enforcement officer with years of experience, seemed shaken by what investigators had discovered. In an interview, Sheriff Phillips described what deputies found when they executed the search warrant. "We executed the search warrant and, as you know, we found what was an obvious crime scene," Phillips told reporters. "And then, ultimately, we found charred remains in the backyard of the property." When asked about a possible motive for such a heinous crime, Sheriff Phillips was honest about the limitations of the investigation at that stage. "Although we have been investigating for several days, we are still in an early phase," he said. And that's perhaps one of the most frustrating aspects of this case. Even with a confession, even with the physical evidence, the question of why remains murky. What could possibly drive a son to murder his own mother? What circumstances could lead a husband to not only allow his wife's murder, but to participate in the disposal of her body? What darkness existed in that home that the outside world never saw? Based on the evidence collected during the search and Gabriel Vilches's confession, both he and David Gardner were formally charged with 2 serious felonies: criminal homicide and abuse of a corpse. The criminal homicide charge is straightforward. Under Tennessee law, criminal homicide is the unlawful killing of another person. This charge encompasses various degrees of murder and manslaughter, and the specific degree would be determined as the case progressed through the legal system. The abuse of a corpse charge relates to what Gabriel and David did after Sylvia was killed. In Tennessee, as in most states, it is illegal to improperly handle or dispose of human remains. The burning of Sylvia's body and the scattering of her remains was not only a practical attempt to destroy evidence, but also a separate crime in itself. It showed a level of disrespect and dehumanization that goes beyond the murder itself. Both men were held at the Sequatchie County Justice Center as they awaited their initial court appearances, and when they finally stood before a judge, the legal system made clear that they would not be walking free anytime soon. During a court hearing on Friday, November 1st, a Sequatchie County judge made the decision to deny bond for both David Gardner and Gabriel Vilches. This meant they would remain behind bars as the case moved forward. The judge clearly viewed both men as either a flight risk or a danger to the community, or both. The court also addressed the issue of legal representation. Gabriel Vilches indicated that he would need a public defender, meaning the court would appoint an attorney to represent him because he couldn't afford to hire his own lawyer. He was assigned a public defender named Ted Engel. David Gardner initially told the court that he thought he could afford his own attorney and would be hiring private counsel. He eventually retained Michael Dowd, a lawyer from Dunlap, Tennessee. However, the judge made it clear that there would be no delays. General Sessions Court judge warned Gardner directly, "Once this date is set, whoever this lawyer is that you get, you must understand they must be ready to go on that preliminary hearing date." According to Assistant District Attorney Stephen Strain, a preliminary hearing for both defendants was scheduled for December 8, 2025 at 10 a.m. This preliminary hearing would be a crucial step in the legal process. At this hearing, the prosecution would present the basic elements of their case, and a judge would determine whether there was probable cause to believe that a crime had been committed and that these two men had committed it. If the judge found probable cause, the case would move forward to a grand jury and potentially to trial. News of Sylvia Vilches's murder sent shockwaves through Lewis Chapel. In a place where violent crime is rare, the idea that such a brutal murder had occurred was unfathomable. Neighbors struggled to reconcile what they knew about the family with the horrifying reality. Christy Webb, a neighbor, told reporters she had known Gabriel well. He hung out with his daughter, and they were best friends. Never, ever would they have thought something like this would happen. The sentiment was echoed throughout the community. People who attended church with Sylvia remembered her as kind and devoted, someone who embodied Christian values. Multiple neighbors noted that David and Gabriel appeared loving, with no obvious signs of dysfunction. Behind the facade of a normal family, something dark was festering, and Sylvia paid the ultimate price. In many murder cases, there's an obvious motive: money, jealousy, revenge, self-defense gone wrong. But in this case, the motive remains murky. Was there a history of abuse in the home that neighbors and friends never saw? Was there a specific incident or argument that led to the violence? Was Gabriel struggling with mental health issues that his family had been hiding? Was there some dark dynamic between David Gardner and his stepson that resulted in this deadly collaboration? These questions may be answered as the case proceeds through the legal system. More details may emerge during the preliminary hearing, during grand jury proceedings, or if the case goes to trial. Prosecutors may uncover text messages, emails, or other evidence that sheds light on what was happening inside that home. Mental health evaluations of Gabriel may reveal issues that contributed to the violence, but it's also possible that we'll never fully understand why this happened. Human behavior, especially violent behavior, is often complex and multifaceted. There may not be a simple explanation or a single motive that makes sense of such a senseless act. What we do know is that Sylvia Vilches is gone, killed in a particularly brutal and callous manner by the two people who should have protected her most: her son and her husband. While much of the focus in true crime stories is often on the perpetrators, it's crucial to remember that behind every murder victim is a network of people left behind to grieve and to try to make sense of the senseless. According to reports from Costa Rican media, Sylvia Vilches left behind a daughter in Costa Rica. This young woman now faces an unimaginable tragedy. Not only has she lost her mother to murder, but the person accused of that murder is her own brother. Her family has been torn apart in the most violent and public way possible. Imagine receiving that phone call or knock on the door. Imagine learning that your mother is dead, murdered. And then imagine learning that your sibling is accused of the killing. The grief would be compounded by confusion, anger, betrayal, and probably a desperate search for understanding. For Sylvia's daughter, there will be no more phone calls with her mother, no more visits during the holidays, no more advice or comfort when life gets hard. Her mother is gone, reduced to ashes and buried in a foreign land, far from the Costa Rican home where she was born and raised. Beyond her daughter, Sylvia likely had other family members and friends in Costa Rica who loved her and who are now grappling with this loss. People who perhaps encouraged her journey to the United States, who believed she was building a better life, who thought she was safe and happy in Tennessee. The ripple effects of murder extend far beyond the immediate crime scene. They touch everyone who knew and loved the victim, everyone who has to continue living in a world where that person no longer exists. As of the recording of this documentary, the case against Gabriel Vilches and David Gardner is still in its early stages. Both men remain incarcerated at the Sequatchie County Justice Center, awaiting their preliminary hearing scheduled for December 8, 2025. At that hearing, prosecutors will present evidence to show probable cause that a crime was committed and that these two defendants committed it. If the judge finds probable cause, the case will likely be presented to a grand jury, which will decide whether to formally indict both men on the charges of criminal homicide and abuse of a corpse. If indictments are handed down, the case could proceed to trial. Given the serious nature of the charges and the confession that Gabriel Vilches allegedly gave to investigators, it's also possible that one or both defendants might consider plea agreements to avoid the uncertainty of a trial. The criminal justice system moves slowly, especially in murder cases. It could be months or even years before this case is fully resolved. There will be motions filed, hearings held, evidence presented, witnesses called. The process is designed to be thorough and deliberate to ensure that justice is served and that the rights of all parties are protected. But while the legal process grinds forward, a community continues to grapple with what happened on Lewis Chapel Mountain. A daughter continues to grieve the loss of her mother. And the question of why this happened, why a son would kill his mother, and why a husband would allow it, continues to haunt everyone touched by this tragedy. The murder of Sylvia Vilches is a stark reminder that evil can lurk anywhere, even in peaceful places. It reminds us we can never truly know what happens behind closed doors, that the faces people present may hide terrible secrets. Sylvia came to the United States with hopes and dreams. She was by all accounts a good, kind person who cared about others and tried to be a positive presence in her community. Instead, her life was cut short in the most violent way, at the hands of her own son, while her husband watched. As this case moves through the legal system, we hope justice will be served, that the full truth will come to light, that Gabriel Vilches and David Gardner will be held accountable, and that Sylvia's memory will be honored. Rest in peace, Sylvia Gabriela Vilches Mora. You deserved better. In the spring of 2003, Tyler Edmonds, a boy of only 13 years old, confessed to something that left everyone in shock. He and his half-sister, Christy Fulgham, had killed her husband. What seemed to be a senseless tragedy in an apparently normal home revealed a story of manipulation and betrayal that nobody imagined. But thanks to the courage of Tyler's mother and the tireless efforts of his attorney, The truth came to light, and what appeared to be a tragic accident became one of the most shocking and complex cases in history. This is the case of Tyler Edmonds. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British Edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Tyler Edmonds was born on June 14, 1989, in the American state of Mississippi. He was the son of the marriage formed by Sharon Clay and Danny Edmonds. At that time, Danny was already the father of a teenage daughter named Christy, born from a previous relationship. In 1993, when Tyler was about 4 years old, his mother and father divorced, and for various reasons, he was not allowed to maintain contact with his father. As time passed, the boy's desire to see Danny again grew stronger and stronger. It was during this time that Christy became his only refuge. When Tyler was around 12 years old, Christy began organizing weekend meetings so that both could spend time together without the boy's mother knowing. This complicity made Tyler's attachment to his half-sister even stronger. For him, she was the most important person in the world. At that time, Christy was married to Joey Fulgham. The marriage had 3 beautiful children, and in their community, Joey was known for his firm commitment to his family. But despite her husband showering her with love, Christy was not happy. In fact, she began having affairs without discretion. The situation became so serious that the couple appeared on a well-known talk show. During that episode, Christy made a shocking revelation. She openly admitted that her youngest child was not her husband's. Despite this, as she herself acknowledged on the program, Joey decided to continue being that child's father. However, Joey's efforts seemed in vain when around 2002, his wife took the children and moved in with her lover at the time, Kyle Harvey. Yet by May 2003, Christy had returned to live with Joey, and both were trying to save their marriage. Or at least, that's what he believed. Meanwhile, at 13 years old, Tyler was an outstanding student at his middle school. He had no history of violence. He didn't belong to any gang, nor did he show problematic behaviors. On the contrary, he frequently attended his church and respected adults. To those who knew him, he was a kind and affectionate boy, always willing to help and please others. That same kindness, however, would end up becoming his greatest vulnerability. Friday, May 9th of that year, Tyler was excited. His half-sister had promised him that he would spend the weekend at the beach to celebrate Mother's Day together. On the afternoon of that Friday, Christy picked up Tyler and they went to the house where Joey entertained the children and took them to buy food. Upon returning, Joey went to bed while Christy stayed at the computer with Tyler resting near her. In the early morning hours after waking her brother and her children, Christy asked everyone to get in the car while she finished arranging her things to leave. Although Christy took longer than usual to come out, Tyler could only think about how much fun he would have that weekend. After closing the car trunk, she handed him a wallet to store in the glove compartment. Then they took a different route. Christy told him that plans had changed. First, they would go pick up Kyle, and from there, they would travel together to the coast. Once at the beach, they stayed in a hotel, and although she was unemployed, Christy paid for everything with more than $1,000 in cash. While they enjoyed the trip, Joey's brother began to worry. He had spent a good part of the weekend trying unsuccessfully to communicate with him by phone. On Saturday the 10th, his birthday, Joey missed an air show they were supposed to attend together, something completely unusual for him. Sunday, he also gave no signs of life. That's why, by Sunday afternoon, they sensed that something was wrong. His brother went to the house, but no one answered the door. The brother cut through the window screen and entered the house. There, he found a horrifying scene. Joey was lying face down on the bed with no signs of life. Desperate, he called the emergency number. The police arrived quickly. The officers confirmed that Joey had received a gunshot wound to the back of his head, but although they searched the house for evidence, they found no shell casings, nor Joey's wallet. At another point in the city, as they were returning from the trip, Christie's phone began ringing incessantly. After answering, the expression on her face changed. Then she gave Tyler the news of the tragedy. For his part, Joey's brother was direct with the police and said he knew who was guilty. That's how, despite being a grieving widow, Christie became the main suspect. The officers began their search and found her at her mother's house. And although she gave the impression of being innocent, by that time, the police had already gathered enough circumstantial evidence to arrest her. However, she surprised them when she voluntarily presented herself at the sheriff's office with a very disturbing story. What Christie told the police was that Tyler, 13 years old, had become angry when she told him that her husband was abusing her. That night, according to her version, Tyler waited for Joey to fall asleep, went into his room, lifted the rifle, and opened fire. When they heard this, the agents contacted Sharon and asked her to bring her son to make a statement. Once there, the mother was separated, and another officer led Tyler to the interrogation room. That was the beginning of the ordeal. For hours, Tyler denied having anything to do with Joey's death. He didn't understand why they were asking so many questions, but when they told him what Christie had said, he was completely shocked. He couldn't believe that his beloved sister was accusing him of such a horrible crime. The weight of her betrayal felt unbearable. The officers continued pressing him relentlessly. They told him it was better to confess, that Christie had already told them everything, and that this was his chance to tell his side of the story. Tyler, confused, scared, and feeling completely alone, began to break down. He was just a child facing trained interrogators without his mother or an attorney present. The pressure was overwhelming. Finally, after hours of interrogation, exhausted and terrified, Tyler said what they wanted to hear. He confessed. According to his statement, he and Christie had both held the gun together and fired at Joey while he slept. He described details about how it happened, how the pillow was covered in blood, and how they left the scene. The police had their confession. The case seemed closed. But there was something very wrong with this picture. Tyler Edmonds was not a violent child. He had no motive. He had no history of aggression. And most importantly, the physical evidence would soon reveal that his confession couldn't possibly be true. Tyler found himself facing murder charges. At 13 years old, he was looking at spending the rest of his life behind bars for a crime his sister had committed and pinned on him. His mother, Sharon, was devastated but determined. She knew her son was innocent. She knew that Christie had manipulated him, used him, and then betrayed him in the most horrific way possible. Sharon would stop at nothing to save her son. She found an attorney named Steve Faris, a lawyer known for taking on difficult cases and not giving up easily. After reviewing the file, the attorney was certain that this time his client was telling the truth. Tyler wanted to recant his confession, to tell the real story of what happened. But the judge refused to admit the change in Tyler's statement, allowing only the first confession as evidence. When the trial began on July 20, 2004, the experts knew the power that a confession had as a strong piece of evidence, even if there were indications that it was coerced or false. During the development of the process, a highly respected forensic pathologist stated that according to his analysis, the trajectory of the bullet was consistent with Tyler's version. As an expert, he said there were two pairs of hands on the weapon and maintained that this could be deduced from the angle of the wound on Joey's head. In the end, the verdict was devastating. Life in prison without the possibility of parole until age 65. The sentence was so harsh that even Joey's family felt compassion for Tyler. Meanwhile, unable to give up, and above all convinced that the errors in the process had been too many, Tyler's lawyer bet that the trial would have to be repeated. Therefore, he continued working on the case. But either way, Tyler remained in the correctional center. As a single mother with limited resources, Sharon had only one option: give up everything to save her son. And that's what she did. Although she would be in debt for the rest of her life, Sharon had no doubt that saving her son was priceless. She would sacrifice everything. She sold her belongings, worked multiple jobs, and dedicated every waking moment to fighting for Tyler's freedom. The appeals process was long and full of defeats. The initial appeal was rejected by the circuit court and then by the state appeals court. Tyler's case generated intense public debate and even prompted new legislation driven by state legislators who considered the sentence too severe for someone so young. His lawyer kept insisting until, in 2007, the ruling was overturned after the judge discovered that the pathologist who had examined Joey's body had acted outside his field of specialization by affirming before the jury that two people had fired the weapon. But the state didn't want a new trial, so they offered Tyler, now 18 years old, a plea deal for involuntary manslaughter. If he accepted it, his sentence would be drastically reduced to the point of getting out of prison in just a few months. On the other hand, if he went to trial again and was convicted, it would be life in prison. In the end, both he and his lawyer decided to fight tirelessly to prove his innocence. Meanwhile, the process against Christy continued, and after her trial, she was found guilty and received a death sentence. Additionally, she was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison for convincing two men to help her attempt to escape from jail. The true picture of who Christy Fulgham really was began to emerge. She was not the caring sister Tyler had believed in. She was a manipulator, a sociopath who had used her own brother as a scapegoat for murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She had multiple life insurance policies on Joey. She had asked her own father for a gun to kill her husband, even offering him a new car in exchange. She had affairs with multiple men and showed no remorse for her actions. Tyler's new trial began on October 28, 2008. The defense opened the proceedings with a forceful statement, affirming that not only had he been accused unfairly, but that everything had been based on a completely false confession. When it came time to call witnesses, the first person the defense cited was Christy herself. At that moment, everyone in the courtroom held their breath, but with each question, she invoked the Fifth Amendment and refused to answer, following her attorney's instructions. Paradoxically, far from being a setback for Tyler's defense, that stance ended up benefiting him because it allowed the jury to directly perceive Christy's attitude and character. But that wasn't all. The defense presented an unexpected weapon: the video of Christy's television appearance with Joey. That recording exposed her capacity to manipulate, maintaining multiple relationships at once, some even with her husband's knowledge. Then Tyler's lawyer focused on the true motive for the crime. Christy was seeking to collect several life insurance policies in Joey's name. When Danny took the stand, the most explosive revelation came. His daughter had asked him for a weapon to take her husband's life, all to collect the policy. According to his testimony, Christie even offered him a new car in exchange. After that series of setbacks for the prosecutor stood up to present his argument, and the first thing he mentioned was Tyler's confession. He knew it was the most powerful element in his favor. When questioned about it, Tyler was forceful. He had lied to protect his sister, but the prosecutor replied that this only suggested he was also capable of lying to protect himself. With the case against him, Tyler's lawyer requested that an expert on false confessions testify, but the judge denied it. It was a very hard blow for the defense. Even so, the lawyer had one last resource: to use the main physical evidence in favor of his client based on his own account of what he supposedly saw after opening fire. In that initial confession, Tyler described that after the bullet's impact, the pillow was covered with bloodstains. The defense then called another pathologist who declared that the weapon used could not have caused the damage described by Tyler back then. The crime scene photos supported that analysis. There was no trace of blood on the pillows. The scene was immaculate, and there was no evidence of cleanup. On October 31, 2008, the last day of the trial, the judge agreed to let the jury hear Tyler's second statement. There was silence in the courtroom. It was a very intense moment because, for the first time, the jury had access to details like his mention of the gunshot outside the house. Next, Tyler took the stand to reveal that during the trip Christie confessed to him what she had done. Then she described the story she wanted him to tell when the police interrogated them. She even told him she would give him a signal when it was time to change his story and take the blame. So when the police brought her in during the interrogation, he believed that was the signal. He thought he was protecting his sister, doing what she needed him to do. He trusted her completely. Tyler testified about the manipulation, about how Christie had groomed him for years, using their relationship and his love for her against him. He explained how isolated he felt during the interrogation, how scared he was, and how he just wanted it to end. The defense painted a clear picture: a vulnerable 13-year-old boy, desperate for connection with his father's side of the family, manipulated by a cunning older sister who saw him as nothing more than a convenient patsy for murder. Finally, after tense deliberation, the jury found Tyler not guilty. Upon hearing the verdict, the young man embraced his lawyer and his loved ones. Eager to free himself from such a weight on his shoulders, Tyler felt like he was collapsing for the first time in years. Time later, he would still remember those liberating words as if he were hearing them for the first time. When interviewed outside the courthouse, visibly emotional, Tyler thanked God for hearing his prayers and said he was glad to be able to move on with his life. Tyler had to start from scratch, and the first thing he did was leave Mississippi. His story also put under scrutiny the career of the pathologist whose excesses led to the conviction of two other men who were later released in 2008 after their innocence was proven through DNA and the confession of the real culprit. The state of Mississippi removed him from the list of approved pathologists, and several of his victims were released while others obtained new trials. As for Christie, she appealed her sentence, and in 2010 it was overturned. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Tyler himself has recounted, the last time he heard from her was at the end of 2008 when she sent him a letter of apology. However, she was not able to tell him exactly what she was apologizing for, which infuriated him. It was typical of Christie. Even in her apology, she couldn't take full responsibility for what she had done. After learning about this shocking story, some experts highlighted how Christie managed to deeply manipulate her brother, using him as a scapegoat. According to these specialists, her behavior showed traits associated with narcissism and sociopathy: lack of empathy, self-preservation instinct, and a tendency to project her guilt onto others. Thus, while most people would seek to protect their loved ones, in Christie's case, her personal interest predominated, evidencing a distorted moral structure capable of considering even the closest relatives expendable. This case raises profound questions about the vulnerability of children in the criminal justice system. Tyler was interrogated for hours without his mother present, without an attorney, by trained professionals who knew exactly how to extract a confession. The fact that a 13-year-old child could be convicted on the basis of a confession obtained under such circumstances is deeply troubling. It highlights the need for better protections for minors in the justice system, including mandatory presence of parents or guardians during interrogations, and better training for law enforcement on the phenomenon of false confessions. Studies have shown that juveniles are particularly susceptible to giving false confessions. They are more likely to be influenced by authority figures, more likely to have difficulty understanding their rights, and more likely to believe that confessing will lead to leniency or that the truth will eventually come out. Tyler's case is a textbook example of these dynamics at play. A vulnerable child, desperate for his sister's approval, isolated from his support system, and facing the overwhelming pressure of law enforcement accusation. The case of Tyler Edmonds is a stark reminder of how easily justice can go wrong, especially when it comes to vulnerable populations like children. It's a story of manipulation, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of a false confession. But it's also a story of hope, of a mother's unwavering love, of an attorney's dedication, and of a young man's resilience. Tyler Edmonds lost 5 years of his life to a crime he didn't commit, 5 years during which he should have been finishing high school, going to prom, starting college, experiencing all the normal milestones of adolescence and young adulthood. Instead, he was locked away, labeled a murderer, facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars. The psychological toll of such an experience is immeasurable. Yet Tyler survived. He came through the other side, cleared of all charges, able to reclaim his life and his future. He is a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even the darkest circumstances. As for Christy Fulgham, she remains in prison where she belongs. Her actions destroyed multiple lives. Joey, the husband she murdered for insurance money. Tyler, the brother she manipulated and betrayed. Her own children, who lost both their father and their mother, and countless others touched by this tragedy. Now that you know the details of this tragic story, what do you think? Was it fair that Tyler, being a minor, was interrogated without the presence of his mother or an attorney? To what extent do you think that situation could have influenced his confession and the development of the case? This case should make us all think carefully about how we treat children in the criminal justice system, about the reliability of confessions, and about the evil that people are capable of, even toward their own family members. Thank you for watching this documentary on the Tyler Edmonds case. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, always with respect for the victims and their families. If you found this content valuable, please subscribe and leave a like until the next story. It was just past midnight in Jeffersonville, Indiana. The house was quiet, 3 small children asleep upstairs, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the stillness. But on the lower floor, that silence was shattered. A heated argument had spiraled out of control, words turning into screams, fear turning into desperation. In a matter of seconds, love and rage collided in a way no one could have imagined. By the time it was over, one life would be gone, and three children would wake up to a world forever changed. Neighbors would later say they heard nothing, no cries for help, no breaking glass, just an eerie calm that hung in the air. The kind that makes you wonder how something so horrifying could unfold right next door without a sound. What happened inside that house on March 15th, 2025, would shake an entire community and reveal a story of devotion, jealousy, and unimaginable violence hidden behind a picture-perfect family. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Our story begins in southern Indiana, in the tight-knit community of Jeffersonville, where Deborah North and Taylor Meyer first crossed paths through mutual friends. Both were young adults with their entire lives ahead of them, navigating the typical challenges of building careers and planning for their futures. Like many young people in their community, they were surrounded by friends and family who supported their dreams and aspirations. Deborah had graduated from Jeffersonville High School in 2006, and from early on, she knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life. She had a natural inclination to care for others, a compassionate nature that drew her toward the nursing profession. It wasn't just a career choice for Deborah, it was a calling. She couldn't help but be drawn to helping people, and nursing provided the perfect outlet for her desire to make a difference in people's lives. Deborah's dedication to her goals was extraordinary. She attended Indiana University Southeast, the University of Louisville, and Ivy Tech, pursuing her Bachelor of Science in Nursing across multiple institutions. This wasn't because she was indecisive. It demonstrated her unwavering commitment to excellence. She was willing to do whatever it took to achieve her dreams, even if it meant juggling coursework at different schools to get the best education possible. During this period, Deborah and Taylor's friendship slowly blossomed into something more. Their relationship developed gradually, built on what appeared to be a foundation of shared values and mutual respect. They both talked about wanting the same things from life: a loving marriage, children, and a home filled with warmth and happiness. Taylor seemed particularly committed to the idea of being a devoted partner and father, qualities that aligned perfectly with Deborah's vision of family life. Those who knew Deborah described her as having a fierce, unforgettable presence. She had a contagious laugh, a bright smile that could light up any room, and an ability to love others with an intensity that made everyone around her feel valued and seen. Deborah was strong-willed, full of life, and unapologetically herself. She never pretended to be someone she wasn't, and that authenticity made her magnetic. Deborah loved the outdoors and found joy in experiencing everything life had to offer. Whether she was soaking up the sun by the pool during summer, skiing down mountain slopes in winter, or exploring nature trails, she embraced every adventure with enthusiasm. Her vibrant personality and zest for life made her an attractive partner, and Taylor seemed genuinely drawn to her energy and determination. To everyone watching their relationship develop, Deborah and Taylor appeared to be a perfect match. Their friends and family saw a couple deeply in love, planning a future together with excitement and hope. The progression from friendship to romance seemed natural and right. Those closest to them believed they had found their soulmates in each other. In November 2021, Deborah and Taylor celebrated their love with a wedding ceremony that marked what they both hoped would be the beginning of a lifetime together. The day was filled with joy and promise as they exchanged vows, committing to support each other through whatever challenges life might bring. Their wedding represented not just their love for one another, but also their shared dreams of building a family in Jeffersonville. But here's where the timeline becomes interesting. Deborah had actually welcomed her first child in 2020, before their official wedding ceremony. This suggests that Deborah and Taylor had been committed to building their family together for quite some time, and their formal marriage was simply a celebration of a bond that had already deepened through parenthood. For many couples, this wouldn't be unusual. They were already functioning as a family unit, and the wedding formalized what had already become their reality. Deborah threw herself wholeheartedly into motherhood while simultaneously pursuing her nursing career with remarkable dedication. In 2022, she welcomed her second child, and in 2023, her third, three children in quick succession. This rapid expansion of their family reflected Deborah's deep desire to be a mother and her commitment to creating the large, loving family she had always envisioned. But here's what makes Deborah's story even more remarkable. While raising three young children, she also experienced extraordinary success in her nursing career. After 15 years of dedicated service, Deborah was recognized with the Daisy Award, one of the most prestigious honors a nurse can receive. This award is given specifically to nurses who provide extraordinary compassionate care. It's not something that's handed out lightly. It's reserved for nurses who go above and beyond, who touch the lives of their patients in meaningful ways. Following this recognition, Deborah was promoted to nurse manager at Wellstone Regional Hospital in Jeffersonville. This was a significant achievement, representing years of hard work, clinical expertise, and proven leadership abilities. Her colleagues were effusive in their praise. Think about what Deborah was accomplishing here. She was raising three children under the age of 5. She was working full-time as a nurse. She was taking on additional responsibilities as a nurse manager, and she was doing all of this while maintaining the compassionate, caring approach that earned her recognition as an exceptional nurse. Her ability to balance these demanding roles showcased remarkable strength, organizational skills, and an unwavering commitment to both her family and her patients. More than anything, Deborah's devotion to her children was absolute. She showered them with love, attention, and guidance, approaching motherhood with the same dedication she brought to her nursing career. Friends and family could see how naturally she took to being a mother. It brought her immense fulfillment and joy. She was building the life she had always dreamed of, or so it seemed. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, something troubling was beginning to emerge. The stresses of raising three young children, while both parents maintained demanding careers, began to take a toll on Deborah and Taylor's marriage. What had once seemed like a solid partnership was showing signs of strain. The main issue was Taylor's growing suspicion and jealousy regarding Deborah's professional relationships. As Deborah advanced in her career and took on her role as nurse manager, she naturally developed closer working relationships with her colleagues. This is normal in any workplace, especially in healthcare settings where teams work closely together and rely on each other during stressful situations. But Taylor became increasingly uncomfortable with these professional relationships, particularly those with male colleagues. Taylor's trust issues seemed to stem from deeper insecurities and personal struggles that he had difficulty addressing in a healthy manner. He began interpreting innocent professional interactions as potential threats to their marriage. His paranoia started to consume his thoughts and behavior, creating a toxic atmosphere in their home. Deborah tried repeatedly to reassure Taylor that she was committed to their marriage and that her relationships with colleagues were purely professional. But her reassurances fell on deaf ears. The situation became particularly focused on one specific coworker. Taylor claimed that this coworker's name was saved in Deborah's phone as "my best friend Emily." Whether this was real or imagined, it became the focal point for Taylor's growing jealousy. He convinced himself that this coworker represented a romantic threat to their marriage, despite Deborah's attempts to explain the innocent nature of their professional relationship. As Taylor's suspicions intensified, his behavior transformed from supportive and loving to increasingly controlling and possessive. He began constantly monitoring Deborah's movements, questioning her about where she had been and whom she had spoken to. This created an atmosphere of tension and mistrust that was particularly difficult for Deborah, who valued open communication and honesty in relationships. This pattern is unfortunately common in cases of domestic violence. What often starts as jealousy and possessiveness gradually escalates into controlling behavior, isolation, and eventually physical violence. According to domestic violence experts, excessive jealousy is one of the warning signs of an abusive relationship. When a partner becomes obsessed with monitoring communications, movements, and relationships, it's a red flag that the situation could become dangerous. Friends and family members noticed that Deborah seemed increasingly stressed and withdrawn during this period. The vibrant, energetic woman they knew was still there, but something had changed. The pressure of managing Taylor's suspicions while caring for 3 young children and excelling in her career was taking its toll. Yet Deborah continued to try to make the marriage work, continued to reassure Taylor, continued to hope that things would improve. On the night of March 15th, 2025, the tensions that had been building in the Meyer household reached a devastating climax. What began as another argument about Taylor's suspicions would end with a brutal murder that shocked the community of Jeffersonville and left 3 young children without their mother. The confrontation started when Taylor attempted to access Deborah's computer to search through her personal messages. His behavior had become increasingly invasive as his jealousy consumed any rational thinking he might have once possessed. This wasn't about trust or communication anymore. This was about control, about Taylor's desperate need to validate his suspicions regardless of the invasion of Deborah's privacy. When Deborah caught Taylor trying to access her messages, she confronted him about this violation of her privacy. But instead of backing down or engaging in a constructive conversation, Taylor demanded that she hand over her cell phone directly so he could search through her communications. When Deborah refused to give him her phone, the confrontation escalated into physical violence. What happened next was brutal and horrifying. The argument turned into a physical struggle as Taylor attempted to forcibly take Deborah's phone from her hands. Deborah defended herself, punching Taylor in the face, but he overpowered her and wrestled the phone away. "I'm stronger than you," Taylor told her as he gained control of the device. Those words reveal so much about the dynamic that had developed in their relationship. Physical intimidation had become part of how Taylor asserted control. With Deborah's phone in his possession, Taylor began to choke her. Deborah pleaded with him to stop the violence. "What are you going to do? Kill me?" she asked desperately. "You're going to hurt me and leave our kids with no parents?" Her words reflected her growing fear for her life and her concern for their 3 young children who were sleeping upstairs, unaware that their mother was fighting for her life just floors below them. Deborah tried to defend herself by hitting Taylor with a water bottle, but this only seemed to enrage him further. Taylor grabbed a wine bottle and struck Deborah repeatedly in the head until she lost consciousness. The brutal assault left her motionless on the floor. But even though Deborah was no longer conscious and posed absolutely no threat to him, Taylor's rage had not been satisfied. He left Deborah lying on the floor and went to the kitchen, where he retrieved what he later described to police as a big-ass kitchen knife, a long one. With this weapon in hand, he returned to where Deborah lay helpless and began to stab her repeatedly. The attack was savage and prolonged. Taylor stabbed Deborah approximately 40 times as she lay defenseless on their bedroom floor. 40 times. Let that sink in. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary loss of control. This was a sustained, brutal attack on a woman who was already unconscious, who posed no threat, who was the mother of his 3 children. The scene was gruesome, with blood splattered throughout the room. Even for experienced investigators who would later examine the crime scene, the extent of the violence was deeply disturbing. But Taylor's horrifying actions didn't end with the murder itself. After killing Deborah, he used her phone to take a photograph of her lifeless body lying on the floor. He then sent this photograph to the contact listed as "My best friend Emily," with a caption that read simply, "Your fault." According to Taylor's own statement to police, he hoped the image would traumatize the recipient. Think about the psychology behind this action. In Taylor's distorted thinking, Deborah's death wasn't the result of his own violent choices. Instead, he believed it was the inevitable consequence of what he perceived as her betrayal. He couldn't accept responsibility for his actions, so he sought to blame someone else, to make someone else suffer, to inflict trauma on a person he viewed as responsible for the destruction of his marriage. Taylor also sent messages to Deborah's friends and family members, informing them that he had killed her. These communications went out through text messages and family group chats, creating a horrifying situation for those who received them. Imagine being a family member or friend, opening your phone, and seeing a message from someone saying they've just murdered your loved one. The trauma of receiving such messages is immeasurable. While Taylor was sending these messages and photographs, the 3 children remained asleep upstairs in their home, unaware that their mother had been murdered and their father had become a killer. Officers would later find all 3 children, all under 5 years old, safe inside the home. The presence of these innocent children in the house during such a violent crime adds another layer of tragedy to an already devastating situation. One of Deborah's friends who received Taylor's disturbing messages immediately recognized the severity of the situation and contacted the Jeffersonville Police Department. This friend also drove to the Meyer home to provide assistance to responding officers, demonstrating quick thinking and bravery that potentially prevented even greater tragedy. When officers arrived at the house, they initially attempted to make contact by knocking on the front door, but received no response. Given the information they had received about the domestic disturbance and the photograph showing what appeared to be a body, police made the decision to breach the front door. But before they could force entry, the garage door suddenly opened and Taylor emerged from inside the house. Taylor's behavior toward the responding officers was immediately aggressive and non-compliant, forcing them to use control techniques to subdue him. The confrontation required additional backup from Indiana State Police. Once Taylor was safely in custody, officers entered the house and discovered the horrific scene inside. Deborah's body was found on the bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of the brutal attack that had taken her life. Crime scene investigators worked meticulously to document every detail of the scene. The location of blood spatter, the position of Deborah's body, and the weapon used in the attack all provided crucial details about how the murder had been carried out. This physical evidence would later corroborate Taylor's own confession about the events of that night, At the police station, Taylor was questioned by investigators about his involvement in Deborah's murder. During these interviews, captured on body camera footage, Taylor provided detailed accounts of his actions and motivations. His willingness to confess and his matter-of-fact description of the violence revealed the extent of his psychological break from reality. He was formally arrested and charged with murder, then transported to the Clark County Detention Center, where he was held without bond. On March 18, 2025, just 3 days after murdering his wife, Taylor Meyer entered a plea of not guilty to the murder charge. His trial is scheduled to begin on July 15, 2025, where he will face the possibility of life in prison without parole for the brutal murder of Deborah. The not guilty plea might seem shocking given Taylor's detailed confession to police, but it's a legal strategy that allows his defense team to potentially argue diminished capacity or other mitigating factors. Regardless of the legal maneuvering, the facts of this case paint a clear picture of what happened on that tragic night in March. Deborah Meyer was 37 years old when her life was violently taken from her. She left behind 3 young children who will now grow up without their mother. Her colleagues at Wellstone Regional Hospital lost a valued leader and compassionate caregiver. Her friends and family lost a woman who brought light and love into their lives. The community of Jeffersonville lost a dedicated healthcare professional who spent 15 years caring for others. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic violence. According to statistics from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, approximately 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. Every year, more than 10 million men and women experience domestic violence, and tragically, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe, intimate partner physical violence. The warning signs were there in Deborah and Taylor's relationship: excessive jealousy, controlling behavior, invasion of privacy, and emotional abuse. These behaviors often escalate to physical violence, and in the worst cases, they end in murder. If you or someone you know is experiencing these warning signs, please understand that help is available and you don't have to face this alone. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can call 1-800-7997-233 or text START to 88788. Trained advocates are ready to provide support, information, and resources. Your call is confidential and anonymous. As we close this case, we remember Deborah not as a victim, but as a strong, vibrant woman who dedicated her life to caring for others. She was an exceptional nurse, a devoted mother, and a beloved friend. Her legacy lives on in the patients she cared for, the colleagues she mentored, and most importantly, in her 3 children. To Deborah's family, friends, and colleagues, our thoughts are with you during this incredibly difficult time. To our viewers, thank you for taking the time to learn about Deborah's story. If this case has affected you, please consider supporting organizations that work to prevent domestic violence and support survivors. Remember, behind every true crime case are real people with real families who are left to pick up the pieces. Let's honor Deborah's memory by working to create a world where domestic violence is no longer tolerated, where warning signs are recognized and acted upon, and where everyone feels safe in their own homes. If you found this video informative, please consider liking and subscribing to support the channel. More importantly, if you found this video because you're concerned about your own relationship or someone else's, please reach out for help. Your life is worth saving. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe.